Good morning, everybody. How are you? We are going to go ahead and get started. I think some more folks will be trickling in after now that Mr. Davidson has concluded his remarks. But thank you all for being here today. My name is Saul Hernandez, and I'm excited to be here at the State of the Net conference with all of you, and with most importantly our three incredible panelists who are working every day to advance digital equity and broadband adoption in communities across the country. As you know, in addition to funding provided by Congress that gave us the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program and the Emergency Connectivity Program, last year Congress passed the Infrastructure Act that prioritized digital equity in the BEAD program and provided $2.75 billion for Digital Equity Act programs. It also provided an additional $14.2 billion for the Affordable Connectivity Program. This funding is now being deployed, and it's critical we get it right to ensure that every dollar delivers the greatest impact possible. The rubber now is meeting the road, and that's why today's discussion is so important. Our panelists today represent critical stakeholders who are already making digital equity and increased broadband adoption a reality. They're stakeholders who represent a leading skills training advocacy organization, a nationally recognized telecommunications expert with decades of public and private sector experience, and the leader of the nation's first ever state office of digital equity. So please join me, if you would, in welcoming Kate Spiker, who is the Managing Director of Government Affairs at the National Skills Coalition, Deborah Lathen, the President of Lathen Consulting, and Annette Taylor, who serves as the Director of Digital Equity and Literacy at the North Carolina Department of Information Technology. So huge thanks for our panelists being here today and for our audience being here today. And because time is short, if we can get right into it, and would just love to sort of ask a table-setting question to all of our panelists, and that is, how do you define digital equity? And why is achieving digital equity in communities across the country so important?
I've been nominated to look at it. Okay.
But then push. There you go.
I define digital equity as being different from equality. And equity means serving the specific needs of the community, of the individual. You know, we don't all start off on equal ground. And so it is being able to, it's specified, it's localized. It's more than just being equal. You know, for example, everybody probably has the right to go to public school, but we know in public schools, everybody does not get an equal education. There are inequities. So that's my definition of equity.
Sure. So I appreciate that you started in part with what it's not, because I'm going to do the same thing. I think digital equity requires someone to be able to access broadband, to be able to access devices, and to be able to access the skills that enables them to use those devices. And on top of that, I'd add that given the amount of need within the workforce for people to have digital skills, that we can break digital skills down into thinking about someone's ability to use devices at a basic level, and then the industry-specific need that they'll need for some of those digital skills that go beyond someone doing something just on a smartphone.
Exactly. Yeah. So there we go. Okay, so thanks to my colleagues for setting the stage there. I think we all know the definition of what I think NTIA or what is defined as digital inclusion, and people having the right resources and tools that they need that meets them where they are to be able to participate fully in the society and be full participants in this digital economy. And I just want to say what North Carolina sees achieving that as. We want our households to have 80% subscription in our effort to close the digital divide. That is part of our goal. And we want our racial minorities to achieve it at 80%. Right now, Black households are at 64%. Native Americans, 57%. And you know we have a large population. We have 8 tribal communities in North Carolina. There's a lot of fear there among our Hispanic population, who are at 68%. So we're trying to get across all racial subgroups 80%. And of course, we want all of our households that have students in K through 12 to be at 100%. And so we believe that we'll be very close to achieving digital equity if we reach some of those goals.
So a follow-up on that, Annette, and question for both you and for Deborah, and Katie, please jump in as well. Deborah's handbook, which by the way is available in print by this door, and also you can scan these QR codes that are on all of the chairs. If you would like, it's an excellent handbook. I encourage you all to read it. But the handbook that Deborah recently released highlights the fact that the broadband adoption gap is far greater than the broadband availability gap. So according to the FCC, 90% of U.S. homes have access to broadband at 25.3 or faster, yet only 77% of households subscribe to home broadband. And so, Deborah, your research found similar numbers. Why is it that you think that some folks who have access to broadband have not yet adopted the service? And what do you think the root cause of that delta is?
Well, I think, I think that, we can't, let me backtrack a little bit. We talk about digital divides, we talk about skill divides. But before that, there was the Rift Valley of a divide of people who have not been a part of this society, who do not trust government. Okay. So I think the adoption issue boils down to income. We see there are lower income people who do not subscribe. It boils down, and they tend to be people of color. They tend to be tribal people who have not adopted broadband. And it also boils down to whether or not people consider it to be relevant. And so right now, when I say, so the digital divide, the skills divide, they just dumped more into a deep rift that was already there. And we use terms like socioeconomic issues need to be determined. But what does that really mean? That means that, they just stopped giving me the amount of money that I was supposed to get for SNAP. I used to get $300 a month. Now I get $90 a month. Okay. It means that I don't have access to decent health care. All of those things are going to impact whether or not people adopt. Yeah. And so it's more than just socioeconomic. It is, can I feed my teenagers on $91 a month? So we have to start thinking about this in really real terms. And then I think you go to adopt and you can tell people how this is going to help you with these issues that impact your life in a negative way. And then the last thing I'll say, because I'm not the only person on this panel, is trust. Okay, we say trust, but what does that mean to people who have already been sitting in the middle of this huge gap? We're cutting off food stamps now. Oh, wow. The government doesn't care about me, so you have to get past. And how do you get past that? You have to talk to people who've walked in the same shoes as the people who are trying to get to adopt. You have to have people who know the community who can navigate through it. So that's my rather long answer.
And Annette,
Let me really just speak to North Carolina being so rural. So availability obviously is the biggest challenge in some places, most places that are in rural areas. And of course, there's an underserved in some of the other areas. Of course, the cost is the factor, is exactly what she's talking about. But then there's the relevancy again. We're getting a little bit past that, but I think it's always going to be an issue. People actually thinking that it makes sense for them. We have a lot of retirees in North Carolina. It's a great place to retire. But there are a lot of people who are like, I don't need this. I mean, we know that our grandparents are just only have it most of the time because their grandkids are coming to visit. And if they don't have Wi-Fi, then they don't want to be there. So I think that's part of what we're trying to address by determining what are the barriers, what make people feel safe. Of course, that there's that safety issue, cybersecurity, which is one of the reasons that I'm very happy and proud that our office is in our Department of Information Technology because we focus a lot on cybersecurity.
And Kate, any thoughts on that question?
Yes.
Please.
I was seconding and thirding my thought. I think that I can probably start jumping ahead to some of the other questions that you've got with it. It just makes me think of so many different pieces of the conversation. The first is that we're in DC, and we know that a lot of the policy decisions that we've made for decades have created the wealth gap and the inequality that we're seeing play out in some of the digital conversations. And it's reflected in where we see people's ability to access skills. It's reflected in that division that I explained between the basic skills that people need in order to use a smartphone, and then the ability to read software if they're on a construction site, or to use augmented reality, not just to play a game, but to repair something in an aerospace engineering center. And so we're thinking about how we actually measure the impact of this across communities, both when someone can help their grandparents on the internet, and then recognizing that that's not the full problem here, and we can adjust and get down to some of the more specific, ways to address these inequalities, and not just check the box and say that, the BEAD funding is good.
Yeah.
Right.
So affordability came up in each of your answers, and important to note that the creation of the Affordable Connectivity Program provides a $30 subsidy to qualifying households. And important to note that a lot of ISPs, Comcast, Charter, Cox, among others, have created plans that cost $30 a month, essentially making the service free. And so, do you think that to that end, what role does ACP play in one of the many ways that we can close
I'll answer that.
the digital divide?
I think it's critical. It's crucial. It's imperative. Those are the first adjectives I can come up with. ACP, we've got to increase awareness. People, I know some of people, they never heard of it. So you got to get the word out that it's there. That's imperative. And then the other thing is, there are 48 million people that are eligible, but only 18 million have cell phones. So that's the awareness part of it. But the other part of it is also that we have got to really push Congress to extend the ACP. Because if we don't, the consequences will be dire. And we can't let it lapse. Congress takes its time. If it lapses, what happens during that period? It'll be, I told you, I don't trust government. They signed me up here. All they wanted was my information. Okay. So you can't let it lapse. Okay. And we need, it's critical because this is, as Davidson said, this is a monumental time. This is the only time that we're going to get, probably in our lifetimes, to make this happen. So awareness and push Congress to really extend ACP.
Yeah.
Go ahead, and sorry. I was going to ask. To Deborah and Annette, you are on the ground in all of North Carolina's 100 counties, and you all mentioned the role of trusted community partners. Talk about how digital navigators and folks, organizations within the communities, whether that's churches, the Boys and Girls Club, schools and libraries, etc. What role do they play, and how are you in North Carolina and your counterparts in other states working with those community partners to Deborah's point to increase visibility of the program?
Yes, we're creating that awareness. She's right. Awareness is really key. And also just understanding it. We know in North Carolina that there are 1.1 million people who are actually eligible for it. We currently actually have 675,000 households that are on the Affordable Connectivity Program, but we have a goal to get at least 1 million on, because we know everyone is not going to get on. There are always going to be people who just don't trust it, just don't want it, just don't understand how it makes sense to them. But we're working with libraries, all of our trusted partners. People know now that we are focusing on this. We've been out there, we've been in the news, they've been hearing things. So, they're looking, they're like, how can we get involved? What do we need to do? People are a little nervous about it, but we are hiring digital navigators. We're actually going to have our own statewide digital navigation program in our office. We're using ARPA funds to invest in that. We're going to launch a major PR campaign, because we have to partner and we have to support the work that ISPs are already doing, the ones who have these programs, the ones who are really making an effort. We get calls all the time. We have a toll-free number, actually, but there's no one actually managing it, and we're making a change. We're hiring. Is anyone interested in coming in? We're hiring. We're really trying to create programs, and we're also looking to establish a hotline with our NC 211 system, because they already have the infrastructure in place. And so that program would not just create awareness, they're going to have digital navigators who build that trust. They have to listen to people, and that's what I've been doing for the last 9 months, people calling in, and you can't just get on the phone and say, okay, refer them to another number. They want to tell you their story. They want you to understand what's happening. I submitted my application. I don't have Wi-Fi, so I had to send it in by mail. What happened to it when it went in? Can you call them because they're not answering my call? There's a lot of different barriers, and people give up on it. So we want to reduce that, eliminate that, mitigate that by putting people in place who care and people who actually want to help someone connect the dots.
And are some of your digital navigators in North Carolina going to be regionally based in different parts of the state?
Yeah.
We would say as a North Carolinian, as an adopted North Carolinian, we say from Murphy to Manio. And I imagine that you're going to have folks in all parts of the state who have deep relationships in these communities that they serve.
Right. And that work is already taking place. We have an organization in Charlotte, which Charlotte is one of our largest, municipalities in North Carolina. They have a Center for Digital Equity. They already have a digital navigation program. They're also working with Education Superhighway, which has been very helpful. And I think other states obviously have this same opportunity. They have put the information out in the public schools. In the public schools that actually have, I think Title III, students, they're working really hard on targeting students in the university system that have Pell Grant, that get the Pell Grant. And I think it's working because we actually saw an uptick. So that's in Charlotte, the western area. There's nonprofits in the mountain areas. And then we have eastern North Carolina, which is a really huge rural area where there's a big concern there. And so we are working with churches all across the state, really, but there's a huge church presence that has huge associations, and they're touching every single nonprofit. And so we're investing in those type of programs for digital navigators. And of course, the libraries. We have a huge library partnership. I don't want to go too far into the questions, but I will say that we're using some of our ARPA funds to invest in grant-funded programs so that the nonprofits can not just help us get the word out, but they can create their own digital navigation programs. And one of them is the public library system.
Got it. Thank you. Katie, I wanted to talk about your report that your organization recently released. So last month, the National Skills Coalition, in partnership with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, released a report on closing the digital skills divide. It too is impressive and comprehensive, and provides several recommendations on how we all can collectively work toward delivering digital equity. So your report makes clear, and we've been sort of talking about this throughout the questions, that we can't close the digital skills divide by operating in silos. And so if you would share with our audience your recommendations and the report's recommendations on the holistic approach that the coalition offered that involves government, private sector, and these trusted community partners that we've been talking about.
Absolutely. Before I start, I want to offer two caveats. So the first is, as I'm nodding in agreement with everything you're saying about how incredible the report is, our research team put it together. So I want to tell you all the stories as our government affairs side, but I'm going to have to read all the numbers that the author, Amanda, and the folks from the Reserve Board put together. So, and the other thing that I'll build on before I get started is your point about breaking down silos, which is really where National Skills Coalition sits. So we're based in, as the name suggests, a coalition of the folks at the ground level who are really involved in helping someone navigate the process of education after high school, of figuring out how to get and keep and progress within a job. And we also sit, because of that coalition function, at really a pragmatic spot where we try and identify what are the solutions that can work for businesses, particularly small and mid-sized companies who engage most with our public workforce system. And then how can we, from that coalition, really break down across silos? So we're hitting the kind of policy solutions that a community college for, now I didn't write down the regions, but for the central part of the state can connect with the nonprofits who aren't funded through higher education funding in the east or western part of the state. And it's that breaking down silos that I hear, and when you're describing about in North Carolina, that we find so critical, talking about how someone gets any kind of skills. The good thing is with digital skills, we've been able to dig in and get some really accurate real-time numbers about what businesses are hiring for today. So my colleagues looked at 43 million job postings from last year, which is different from how we usually are able to evaluate the kind of skills needs that folks have, because we're usually looking at projections of labor market data, or we're looking at the past to say, here's what investments, for example, from the Recovery Act 15 years ago had an impact on as we spent down that money. But the researchers with the Federal Reserve Bank and National Skills were able to drill down into those real-time job postings and found that 92% of jobs today require at least one digital skill. So that means that almost every job that someone's hiring for is going to need them to have education that they're probably not getting in high school. And for our for communities of color, are much more less likely to be able to access through our for our secondary system, at the public system. And so that means that people are walking into these trusted intermediaries looking for these digital skills. And it does really differ across states and across regions within states, whether we're talking about a community college, an industry association, a chamber, the nonprofits. And so what we like to think about is about that intermediary and how we're supporting the ability of that intermediary to engage with businesses who are hiring workers, as well as some of the folks that are going to help people succeed in that job training program and in that job. So it's about supporting the community college, for example, ensuring that they've got a digital navigator that's connecting to businesses in the area and identifying the critical skills. And then it's about ensuring that some of the human service providers are able to link up and help people get through that training program. So it's making sure that they have nutrition services through SNAP. It's making sure that they're able to continue to access healthcare services or continue to access a bus or transportation route that they need or child care that they need throughout that program. And the exciting thing about this is how we look holistically at people who need jobs across the needs. And so we've got the information about what works in the digital space and for digital skills. It's just about drilling down to the fact that right now, again, those 92% of jobs, over time, that could on average lead to a $23,000 increase in earnings per year for people to go from that no digital skill level to having just one digital skill in those jobs.
Deborah, you were nodding. Any thoughts on that question and Katie's organization for Fork?
It's amazing. It's incredible. It's really fantastic. And I guess yes, my thoughts on that is we have to put it all to get these skills. We have to follow, stand everything together. But it's in everybody's self-interest to do it. It's not just for the underserved and the unserved. Because if 92% of our jobs require that you have one digital skill, what does that mean for our economy? What does it mean for our GDP? What does it mean for us to be able to compete in the world on a large scale?
Oh, I have this number. Yes, why did you just go to Manford That's for the number.
So it's not just upskilling those who don't have skills just because it's the right thing to do, which it is, but it's also, we all need this. We need this for our country to thrive and to continue to be in world play.
Absolutely. Well, the first number that came to mind is that when we're talking about the tax base then for families, that means that when someone's going from a job that doesn't require any digital skills to one that requires just one, that's about anywhere from a $2,000 to $4,000 tax increase that family will have, which means the community will then have those resources to support the public education and to support the nutrition services and additional things that help not just, to your point, the workers succeed, but businesses see that sustained growth.
Yeah. Well, I just want to remind people of the folks who help with our supply of our food systems, farm workers. We have a lot of farm workers in North Carolina, but it's not just about them working out there in the farm. They have to learn to operate those digital systems now. The irrigation system, that's all technology. And of course, they have opportunities to move beyond what they start in. And we also have a large migrant, workers and a lot of immigrants coming in. And I'm getting phone calls from folks saying, are there any grant funds available for us to get devices to households of people who just came in? So, I'm navigating a lot of different type of partners and relationships because, our funds are not specifically for that in that way. We can't just give them out. We're not a corporation who might have discretionary funds. We have to have a process. But I do want to remind people that there's another population of folks who are contributing to our economy.
Well, but the ACP does provide a minimal amount of money for equipment. And then you do have some corporations and companies that are coming together to provide more support. So I think it's going to have to be going back to the private, government partnership, because the businesses realize that they need people with digital skills.
Right. Yeah. And the $100 is very helpful, but a lot of people say, well, if the computer is at $400, I still need the other 300. And then how's it going to get maintenance when I have an upgrade? So sustainability is a big factor in this whole process.
Well, and that leads me to my next question, and you all sort of alluded to this in the previous, your answers to the previous question, but working with networks of organizations within the coalition and just writ large in trying to deliver digital equity, what is in addition to private sector, working to build out these networks, taking advantage of the BEAD funds to do that and to edge out into either underserved or unserved areas. What do you see the role of the private sector in increasing not only adoption of broadband, but also in helping to close the digital divide, which obviously adoption is a big part of that. I'll ask Annette. From
Incentives for workforce incentives for folks to even understand what type of jobs are available. It's not just creating the awareness where they go into the community colleges. I mean, they could create programs in the high school so they begin to understand. Because since we're in a workforce crisis, you got to get people younger. We are in a skills-based type of workforce where everyone doesn't have to go to a four-year university to get the type of skills they need for these jobs. So I think that the private sector could help there because it's going to help them reach their goals. I mean, the ARPA funds that we use with the GREAT grants, we just distributed about $280 million in GREAT grants to some providers in North Carolina. And they need to try to do this deployment fairly quickly. But I think the workforce shortage is a problem there. So how do you get people to understand that, can you take this class here at the community college? And then I also rely on them for awareness of the ACP. So there's kind of a twofold in addition to what they're already doing around. And I'm just kind of speaking to those groups, but there are other corporations. We have corporate funders who want to be in this space. There's a healthcare insurance company that's like, hey, we want to be involved everywhere we go around the state talking about the medical or health crisis. How do we get involved in this broadband space? And so because telemedicine is so important to them.
Kate, any thoughts on that question? Right up your alley.
Yeah, well, yes. What you're, I think it goes back to some of the strategies that we know work across how people find jobs when they find them, and when it doesn't work in our public workforce system, we're seeing the same things kind of repeated right now without those intentional linkages between the companies that are hiring for digital skills, which going back to the report, right, that's all companies, 92% of them, but so that they're engaged in the ability for someone to gain those skills. They're engaged in that process. They're spending the time investing in making sure the curriculum at the community college is meeting their needs. And that's often, it's not so much just someone from a big corporation going in and having a conversation with a community college. It's bringing together 5, 6 businesses in the local area that might need someone with a certain kind of welding skill. And they also are going to need the digital skills in order to do the quality control there. And it's because the community college is really only able to run a course when they've got 10, 15 students in it, even on the non-credit side. Then we see multiple companies coming together to work together to figure out what that curriculum looks like. And from a small and mid-sized company, it could be the president who's showing up to have some of those conversations. And so we look at that kind of over time commitment that we need from industry to be part of the conversation. And we see a lot of small and mid-sized companies stepping up. The cost of turnover for a smaller mid-sized company when someone's been with the company for less than a year is still $25,000. And so by helping someone gain the skills who works for the businesses, by engaging with partners who can help both new workers and the workers at that company upskill, that company can save some of that investment and maintain the continuity of having a worker who's been skilled up to their needs.
And we have seen companies that are, stepping up to the plate. And, Comcast they're doing their UP program. And they've been doing digital literacy skills training for well over a decade now. And so it's important to connect with those organizations who have expertise and money.
Yeah. And I also add to that, thinking about the workforce nonprofits in the community, like the Goodwills.
Right.
Because, the corporate sector, a lot of times people just see them as business. And so for them to build that trust and that comfort for people to want to be a part of this process, they can connect with folks like Goodwills and Urban Leagues, and they're the ones who are helping to serve individuals like the incarcerated and reentry. And so we must use that human capital as well.
Very good. Thank you. So Deborah, a question about your handbook, that again is available in the back of the room and on the QR code here. It lays out best practices for state and local policymakers that I would imagine would trickle up to the federal level as well, to ensure that digital equity programs and interventions are equitable by design. And so you make several recommendations on digital skills programming, digital navigators as critical components for helping folks overcome a range of barriers to adoption. But if you would, can you talk about some of those recommendations and best practices, and how they're being put to use across the country?
I won't go into detail about all of them as they're in the book, but it's critical to have data and to have good data, to have good maps, because you got to know where people are to build out the infrastructure, and you have to know where they are to be able to reach them, to get them to adopt. So that's critical. And we say that it's got to be equitable by design, and that's one of the critical components, having the correct data. And then you have to have measurable objectives. You got to have somebody who you could hold accountable, that you go to, and to make certain that your plan is actually being instituted. And we know that you got to make certain that it's affordable. That's the piece, the American ACP, and it's available. And digital literacy skilling is imperative. And just the whole awareness is very, very important. Those are all critical things that we mentioned. And another thing that I would add, that I thought about actually later, was, enforcement's going to come. So we know that the states and localities will be held accountable for how all this money is being spent. And so there's a delicate balancing act that goes on to make sure that you have the information to support how the funds are being spent, but also to make such certain that they're not so onerous that people want to block. They're like, I don't want to turn over this information to you. And so that's a delicate balancing act that I think you have to do in your planning as well. And as I say, this is all on page 4 of my head.
But Annette, and sort of to Deborah's answer, in North Carolina, you're leading a team that's building and implementing the state digital equity program, and again, the first in the nation to have the position that you hold. What does that work look like that you and your team are undertaking in the 100 counties across the state, and what are some of the opportunities and challenges that you're facing?
Thank you for that, Saul. I am very proud of North Carolina and the work that's been done, and how our administration led in this effort. The challenge, okay, so we have an obligation to get as many people as connected as possible, as fast as possible, and we have an opportunity. The opportunity is meeting people where they are, and the challenge is meeting people where they are. It's a matter of, again, creating that awareness, but also creating the space for them to give input. And in our digital equity plan, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're involved like every other state, and now we're kind of at 6 months, so we feel kind of rushed, right? We want to get this right. But we also have a digital equity plan that is due to NTIA in October. If anybody wants to extend that, we'll accept that. But we're putting together a full community engagement plan with all the covered populations. We're going to do that in a very strategic way. Of course, we have a very strong facilitation guide. We're working with consultants who are going to help us with that, as well as writing the plan. And I think that it's important that you ask the right questions. We have a lot of listening sessions planned, and now organizations are calling us, can they be part of our listening sessions? Not just part of them, but can they facilitate one just for their population? So those who know about us are kind of making it easy for us. But we're also doing regional sessions so we can make sure that the anchor institutions are involved, the local government coordination is there, the state. So it's not just about our state agencies being involved, which they are a huge part of the solution because they're already serving these populations, but we got local government who needs to be there. They're the ones who know a lot about what's going on with the infrastructure, but they also are serving those people at the local level. And so they know what the barriers are. I was just actually talking to my sister-in-law yesterday. She's a director of social services in Wilmington. And so she was saying, oh, we already sit down. We have a computer lab so that when people come in to apply for food stamps or even child support, we just tell them if you want to go over there and self-serve, you can do that. And we tell them all the programs because a lot of them feel uncomfortable with it, right? And she says, but then they always have a barrier. I don't want to put my information out there. I don't know what you're collecting on me. Oh, I have this problem. Somebody might find this out. There's a lot of stuff, but they have people, she said, we'll sit right down with them and walk them through it and tell them what they have to put in and what they don't have to put in. And that's where the role of the digital navigator, but being in that type of place, I was really impressed to know that because I'm thinking more about libraries or even the community college. We know the library is that place in every community, everyone is welcome, right? Not everyone's going to social service, but again, it's back to meeting them where they are.
And so with you mentioned, putting together the state digital equity plan, that's due to NTIA in October.
Yeah.
How are you and your team in North Carolina at the Department of Information Technology? How are you not only engaging with stakeholders on the ground in the 100 counties, but how are you interacting with your federal partners at NTIA? The FPOs are going to be in federal program officers are going to be in every state, and we're just curious for this group how those conversations and how that work is going.
Yes, we meet with our federal program officer every week. I think it's every week or every other week, but definitely they're available to us. They want to be supportive. We really appreciate that. They're not pushy. And so they're available to either come to any of our conventions or they will host one for us. And we like that. But not just that, we may have questions. Like, we don't have this all figured out. Everybody's trying to understand it and figure it out. And so when we have questions, they're available to answer questions. There's a lot going on with the, risk management issues. We've just got to get this right. So it's been very helpful to have a team. There is that regional director and even the regional director with the federal program officers. They kind of give that federal program officer, and I don't see Will, but he was here earlier, the autonomy to work with us and to answer our questions and then to come back, because many of them are learning as well. So we're all learning together. So I think it's been a really great relationship that we're building. They know our plan. In North Carolina, we kind of put together our own outreach plan, and we made sure that we, crossed all the T's and dotted the I's so that when they came to us and said, hey, we want to help you do this, we're like, we got it. This is what ours look like, right? And it was like, oh, that actually looks good. So, but we receive their feedback. We want them to be right there at the table with us. And so we feel like we have a really good, robust plan for how we're going to get feedback. We're going to do surveys. We're actually creating our own website so that folks who we did not meet in person, they'll have a way to provide input. We already have a nice website, ncbroadband.gov. And on that website, there are a lot of resources there, but we're going to beef that up because we want people to know how to get involved with us. But we have a webinar coming up tomorrow, so I'm going to have to get back soon. But in our webinar, we're going to tell everyone about what the process. And so we have been pushing this out through press release and every single stakeholder that we already have information. And so we are planning to make sure that as many people as possible that want to be involved can be involved. We'll create that plan, of course, as we draft that plan. Our goal is to have our plan drafted, I think, by August, so that we'll have the 1 month to give the public feedback to get it. Maybe it's by July, because August is the month I think we needed public feedback. We need all of September to actually fix it, update it based on the guidance and advice. And then, of course, we'll need to get it to our governor because, he's the man. He needs to see it. And then we'll need to submit it in a timely manner. We tried to go above and beyond, so we'll try to probably have ours in earlier, although I was asking for an extension.
And Deborah and Katie, do you in your capacity, Deborah, Katie, at the National Skills Coalition, work with federal partners, NTIA, FCC, and in what capacity, and how do you find the support and conversations back and forth with them?
We work with them in two capacities. So the first is more from the external affairs, government affairs side. We work a lot with helping our networks understand, so the community colleges, the public workforce practitioners, the businesses with whom we work, about what's happening and how they can hook into the work that the states are doing. When we think about the first part of the conversation, we were talking about the workforce challenge that all this has. We have a whole silo within public services of a public workforce system that has resources. They're stretched, they're underinvested, they're probably not the place to tap to look for all the solutions for some of these challenges until Congress fixes the way that we invest in it. But they are a required partner in order to really see success in some of this, because you can tap into the infrastructure, you can tap into some of the funding. And so it's about bringing together all those entities, and that's the place where we've been working with NTIA at the federal level. The other side is some of the technical assistance that my colleague who authored the report are working on across our policy team to work with states and dig into what are some of the barriers for connecting across the broadband office and the workforce and higher education systems within the state, and helping them come together to have, and this is what, and that I was struck by everything that you were sharing, is so pragmatic and practical and detailed in the steps. And that's really what we're trying to help make the connections from, bringing the other partners who are not the connection experts and not the digital experts together in order to build on that expertise that we see in Annette's office with the workforce capacity that we know exists at the local and state level as well.
Deborah, do you have any? Yep. Okay. Any a follow-up to that question, sort of any advice, and this is for each of you. You all represent different constituencies and have different areas of expertise. Any sort of advice for an NTIA or an MCC with respect to the administering of these programs, and as Deborah alluded to, this once in a lifetime investment in not only increasing adoption, but also not only increasing access, but also increasing adoption.
For
Me, babe.
oh, I'm still there.
I just, what I would say is, I spent a lot of years in government, and I spent many years in Washington, D.C. And my advice to NTIA diplomatically would be that I know it's the flip side of what I just said. I know that you have to be responsible that fraud, waste, and abuse does not occur. But do not overdo it and overregulate this to the extent that it is a deterrent for people and states to participate in programs. That's one thing I think that NTIA should be cautious about. But on that note, I'd say, look, I'm super optimistic that NTIA is going to make this happen. Just heard Davidson speak, and he's certainly excited about, because this is our time. This is it. So, and they are the experts, but just don't overdo it. Don't be too Washington. Don't be too bureaucratic.
Understood. Katie, any thoughts on that?
I think one of the successful things that we see happening with NTI right now is collaboration with other federal agencies and sub-agencies. And I think that's really critical. They released guidance around some of the connections between workforce practitioners maybe 6 months ago that was informed really closely by some of the job quality plans that Departments of Commerce and Labor and Education have been working together on, so that we're thinking about the digital skills that someone has access to being a pathway not just to a job, but to a good job that supports business growth and that individual's growth, and those connections and breaking down the silos, modeling at the federal to enable and support it happening in the way that we know it can and is at the state and local.
You understand one more thing, because I do have great competence in NTIA. I actually did previously some review of applications that they've received, and I can't go into the details of it. But the review was thorough, it was compassionate, and they wanted people to be able to get the funds and to succeed. And that's where they started. Yeah.
I'll just touch on 2 points. Our state, just like others, completed the application for the digital equity planning funds. I'm very grateful that we received those. Their support and technical assistance was, second to none. We were very grateful, as some of them were figuring it out as well. As I said, I think us understanding the role between them and NIST, and back to your point about partnerships, I would say just to continue improving that, because it makes a difference for the states who are delivering these programs. And same with FCC. I mean, we're still trying to understand the data. Obviously, everyone is, but understanding and listening to us as the people who are at the state level deploying it, or executing on this plan, and trying to understand. I don't know if anybody else had noticed this in the states, but in your state, but the enrollment in the Affordable Connectivity Program looked like it was declining for us over a few months. And so since, it's our goal to get it as high as possible, we were like, oh, what's going on here? Why is this going down? I think we're back down to maybe 630, 640. Did people just fall out? Did they not recertify? What's happening? We started understanding a bit more, because we have so many different things going on. We can't just study every intricacy of it. But as we try to understand it for ourselves and the way we want to guide and advise on policy, and even encourage our own, policymakers on how to help sustain it, we just want to understand all those things. And I think being a part of understanding that is really big for us. So I just ask to continue empowering us as you're becoming empowered yourself.
Very good. So we all share the goal of universal connectivity, and the purpose of all of this money that's been made available at the federal level, that's flowing to the states and localities, is to deliver that. And so we know what we started out defining digital equity, but how is digital equity going to evolve once we are able to get the vast majority, 100% connectivity, or as close to that as possible? And as a follow-up to that, what do you think the next set of challenges will be that will encounter as we bring more and more households online?
You're looking at me like I should answer first, because I'm...
Well, look, this is what
What you think?
that's a very, very futuristic question, because right now we're sort of at the basement level of this. And so we're just trying to make it up to the first floor so we can look out and have a better understanding of what the lay of the land is. I think, so it's really hard to predict, what the future looks like, but I know what we have to do today to get to that future. And they're the things that we discussed today. You got to get people signed up. And once we do all of these things, which I think we are absolutely capable of doing, once we do those things, then we also know that technology is just not sleeping, while we are marching forward to get people signed up. We have to know how we will continue to bring people, to elevate them, to meet the new developments in technology.
Yeah.
So I think we're still at, at Tech 101 or Broadband 101 right now.
Yeah. There are always going to be some type of divide, because there's going to be people who don't trust, or we're going to have new citizens who take a while to trust our government systems. And then there's going to be not just the fear of the privacy and all of that, but just the relevancy and the need. So there'll be some divide, but I think that we're moving the needle on that. But as it evolves, more people being online, there's more of a need for cybersecurity, obviously. And then just protection of their data, and how to do that, how to make people feel comfortable with that, and what type of systems are being put in place. So I think as this connectivity equation evolves, I think there's going to be more to build into it, but definitely starting with cybersecurity and privacy. Yeah.
And Katie, this is what your organization does, what the National Sales Coalition does. So it was
Predicts the future.
So do you think? I imagine your response would be that we will continue as to Annette's point and Deborah's point. Technology is going to continue to evolve. More and more skills are going to be required. More investments will need to be made in job training, and organizations like yours will continue to sort of facilitate that. But any thoughts?
Well, so that's absolutely true. And I'd return to the idea of breaking down silos. The infrastructure bill, which just passed, we're not going to be talking about that at the federal level or in Congress, except for the bickering about its implementation. but coming up in front of Congress, we have a bunch of opportunities in order to embed access to digital equity and digital skills within those reauthorizations. So we were talking about the SNAP program, the Farm Bill being up for reauthorization this year, means that there's an opportunity to leverage the investment that goes through farm programs to support someone's education and training, that then they could use those funds to support access to digital skills. Our public workforce system is governed by the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. That's been up for reauthorization. And so I think, and could again be a really critical place to embed some of the things that we know are really useful, both in enabling funds to be used to support access to devices, that flexible support service funds can help someone access and connect, as well as having access to the skills, because it is that whole trifecta of a snowball when you know that the programs are working together. And then the other thing I'll say to the speed of innovation happening, channeling again the author of the report, Amanda, she likes to say that across the pandemic, we saw 10 years worth of technological change in 10 months. And for workers who are not connected to a 4-year degree, that means that they're then going back to try and figure out how to keep those skills and keep the job that they've had. And so that really means leaning into business and small business in particular awareness about their needs over time. We can have surveys, we can have the data that tells us that that's critical. It's also critical with pairing together the voice of a business at a local level to really understand what are the specific skills they need. So we're making these investments. Yes, I absolutely support that we need more of them in both workforce and helping people access and reach towards digital equity. It's also about making sure that we're investing in the right places now so that we can then make the case for how important and how well these investments could impact states, local areas, and people who've been left behind by intentional policy decisions that we've made.
Thank you. I think we have a couple of minutes left if open up to folks in the audience for a couple of questions. Can we go, David?
Well, we hope there will be some flexibility with BEAD. We would like to, but also with digital equity funds that are coming along with that. You're right, it's not as much, but we're trying to leverage our partnerships across the state. There's a lot of philanthropy that's come our way that's talking to us about considering collaborative, a funders collaborative. And we actually want them to try to match some of what we already have. My office, from the ARPA funds has $50 million that we're, working with. It's still not as much as what was on the infrastructure, but we are being wise about how we invest it and how we invest in impactful programs that can be replicable and that people see as something they would want to invest in. And so we hope that's where philanthropy comes in. We hope that's where corporate philanthropy comes in. And also that it will show the type of impact that public policymakers will want to build upon.
There's numerous core programs that are supported by Corporation for National Service, and within our current structure, I think part of what the solution is, again, just to go back to the fact that we started with, right, 92% of jobs require some digital skills, so let's just say it all. And so what we need to embed throughout all of the ways that we help someone connect to a job and to skills is by having some of the other programs that already exist be connected to the digital needs instead of sitting within the 20 or 15 years ago since the last reauthorization of some of those big packages, our core networks, apprenticeship, helping someone at a technical or a community college access these skills in a program that's not necessarily intentionally right now connected to how someone's getting digital skills. And then the one other thing I'll say from domestic and the connections, particularly with businesses, NSC, and we're doing this in large part with some of the person power from Comcast and other corporations, is bringing together a list of Fortune 500 companies who are invested in this idea of digital equities, the way that we were talking about it. It's about the adoption, it's about the devices, it's about skills, and enabling those private partners to use that bully pulpit to connect to whether it's a core system or an innovation that's going to work in North Carolina or in a foreign country.
Thank you.
I think it's a matter of, the providers making it plain that there's a need, and here's how, working with us can be, really valuable and beneficial, not just to you, but, to closing the digital divide. So I really can't say what the best scenario would be, but I know our great grants is 2 years. Yeah. And some of that's already happening.
But I was just reading recently
again, it goes back to digital skills and labor, because I read one of the New England states was having a hard time just getting workers to deploy to do the actual work. So this is all sort of, it's all intertwined. Will it take 2 years? Well, it might take more if we don't have a skilled workforce to be able to dig up the ground and to lay the fiber.
And the supply chain issue, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that Comcast, Charter, Cox, and other ISPs are excited and are building out to these harder to reach areas as quickly as they can. But laying the fiber, connecting the fiber, dealing with different topography and geography is challenging, but it is the work. These are highly skilled jobs that are required to make these connections, and so there is a willingness and an eagerness on the part of ISPs to connect as many households as quickly as possible.
And also the Act mandates that you have to start with the unserved communities first. That is one of the priorities of the Act itself.
Yeah,
it's unserved and then underserved. So it is prioritized.
Okay, so thank you, sir. Very last question. I just like to ask this of folks. We covered a lot of ground today. Briefly, we'll start with Annette, Deborah, and then Katie. What's the one message that you want our audience to leave with today?
Oh, I'll just keep it simple. There's so many messages that I have in my head, but I would say partnership and listening. I mean, partnership is very key to this. We all know that. But listening to not just listening to the constituents, listening to your consumers, and listening to the state.
Adoption, you got to get people to sign up in order to make that happen. They have to be aware of it, and you need to know where they are, so you have to do the mapping. So I think it's critical. We can't succeed without adoption. We're going to get deployment, but we can't succeed without adoption.
Very good.
By both echoing the expertise that you both shared on the panel in these last comments, I would add to it to say that, again, 92% of jobs, all jobs, require digital skills. That means both getting the folks who are going to dig the trenches and lay down the fiber, as well as the folks that are going to be working at that nonprofit that's going to help someone train up with the basic skills they need to click on the computer and help them access their FNS benefits. So I would say that, again, the partnership and connections are critical. And for folks who want to hear my esteemed colleague's voice in her writing in the report instead of my summary of it, you can find it on our website at nationalskillscoalition.org.
Thank you. And so thank you all for being here today and for being patient with us. I think as demonstrated, these are three incredible thought leaders in this area. If we can be...
Thank you. Thank you.